In this video, I'm going to show you the simplest method for writing catchy, beautiful chords as a beginner producer. Your chord writing ability plays a key role in how well you can emotionally express yourself within your music, and not being able to make great chords will limit your ability to do that. So here's 4 steps to writing deeply emotional and catchy chords as a beginner producer. Step 1 to writing great chords is to first pick a scale. Scales are just groups of notes that help you define an emotion or vibe in your song. There are 2 main types of scales to choose from. The first are major scales, which cover a subset of positive or happy emotions. The second are minor scales, which cover a subset of deeper or sad emotions. Notice the difference in aura between the two. I'll play them back again. Here's the major scale and the minor scale. Just playing the notes like that is like its own melody. When choosing a scale, you have to think about what mood or energy you would like your song to express, and then use your best judgment to pick a scale that'll help you get there. For the next couple steps, I'm going to use the scale of A minor. This is one of the most common scales in electronic music, and it's great for deeply emotional and feely music. Now that we have our scale picked, we can get on to step 2, which is build your chord progression 1 chord change at a time. It's here that most beginner producers mess up. Let me first show you how they mess up so you don't have to make this mistake. Every scale is made up of 7 notes, but these notes also represent the 7 different chords within that scale. Typically, to build a chord progression, you would take any combination of these 7 chords and arrange them into a 4 or 8 bar loop. And now you have a quick musical idea. The problem with this method, though, is that you're relying on randomness and your ability to remember what different progressions sound like. As a beginner producer, you'll have a lot more control over the emotion you generate if you build your progression 1 chord change at a time. This approach for building progressions looks like this. First, write the tonic chord. This is the first chord in the scale that you've chosen. In my case, it's the A minor chord. Also, make sure your chord is 1 bar long. This is a great starting point. Next, you want to add the next chord in the progression carefully. You can change now to any of the 6 other chords in the scale, and each chord will generate a different emotion. Let's go down to the 6th chord, which is a common movement. You'll notice the emotion generated from this chord change is kind of deep. This is because the change is downward moving. With chords, the emotion is generated more so from the change rather than the chords themselves. On the contrary, if we move upwards, you'll notice a brighter tone. Upward chord changes are more likely to generate a positive, uplifting tone. Now, there are times when this isn't true, but for the most part, it's a good starting point. Now, you can make an entire progression based on this premise. Check this out. Here's the 1, 7, 6, 4. Notice this progression only moves downward, which means we're most likely to get something sad or deep. Here it is with some sad drums if you're not crying yet. Now, contrary to this, we can also make a progression like the 6, 7, 1, 3, and since it's upward movements only, we're more likely to get a positive or uplifting emotion. Isn't that interesting how that works? Now, just because up means happy and down means sad doesn't mean you only can go one direction with your chord progressions. We can add more variation in the emotion generated from our progression by adding more variation in the movements. here's the 1 chord, then we'll go down to the 6. Now we have the 1, down to the 6, up to the 7, and then down to the 4. This variation in movements will help us define a more specific emotion. Another thing to keep in mind with your progressions is the last chord in the progression. This chord carries a lot of emotional weight. You'll notice by ending down on this chord, we get that deep sound. But if we end up, that's day and night difference. So build your progressions 1 change at a time and focus on the direction of each change. Now that we understand changes, let's get on to step 3, which is chord voicing. Okay, so let's say we carefully piece together a chord progression 1 change at a time, and we ended up with the 6, 1, 7, and 5. And we get that progression. To help bring chords to life, you should try to take them out of their basic form. These chords are in basic form because they're each constructed from the root to the 3rd to the 5th, in that order from the bottom. You'll get way more expression out of your chords if you try little things with each of these notes. For example, you can try spread voicing. It's one of my favorites. When you take either the 5th or the 3rd from each chord, in my case, I like to use the 3rd, and just put it up an octave. You can also double any of these voices as well. So I might take the 3rd on the 2nd chord and double it. And I'm almost always going to try to take the bass notes and double those. Enhancing your root by doubling it will help you get a really big chord sound. And lastly, you can try to add the 7th degree to any of the chords and see what sound you get. Or my favorite, which is a pedal tone. A pedal tone is a note that doesn't change when you go through each of the chords. Listen how big these chords are. Isn't that massive? And that's a lot different than what we started with. Okay, here we are at the final step to writing catchy chords, and that is to add rhythm or articulation to your chords. Rhythm and articulation refers to how the chords are played and also controls how much energy you get from the chords. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say you're working with the 6, 7, and 1 chord in the minor scale. If you're making a dance or electronic song, a way you might articulate these chords or add rhythm to them is to use a dotted eighth rhythm. See how it's a completely different energy than our block format? Another option is any standard note rhythm. The way you apply this is to take any sound you want with regularly written chords and then you go into your DAW and add the built-in arpeggiator to that instrument. Every DAW has a built-in arpeggiator. The style of arpeggiation you're going to pick is chord trigger, or really any style you would like, and just start adjusting the rate until you get something really cool. Here's an eighth note, which is very common. Then a 16th note, which gets chaotic. Just to give you some context on how chaotic a song can be when you write it with all 16th note patterns. Wasn't that nutty? All right, one last point I wanted to cover about adding rhythm and articulation to chords is non-chordal arpeggiation. For this one, I'm going to use the chords from Millennium's Sad Songs because I love how he applied this technique in the song. Here's the chords. Just because chords typically play the notes simultaneously doesn't mean you have to play your chords like that. For example, we could take each of the notes of each chord now we could play the exact chords, but as an arp pattern. And this is how Millennium used these chords in his song Sad Songs. Isn't that gorgeous? So there you have it. That's how you could take basic triads like this and try a bunch of things to them in order to add life and energy to them. If you enjoyed this video and would like me to personally coach you so that you can reach your most ambitious music production goals, check out the link at the top of the description below. You can access my courses and private producer community in the description below as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video lesson.